Good morning. I think that the paper that we've put together for this one, a lot of people have worked on. My assistant Hugh Fisk has done a lot of the work and prepared a lot of the work for the article. Kay has done a lot of work on the mortaria stamps, and Gladys, whose work really won't get mentioned much in this, did the work on the Samian. It's going to be a bit of a traditional paper. I'm going to mention a site, and I'm going to talk through some sheds, and maybe throw some questions out at the end, because I think at the moment the products of this kiln, I would need more help, say, from further afield to hopefully recognise them elsewhere. So this is just a picture of the standard colour-coated vessels that we have, and also one of the rubbings from one of the stamps. Okay, so the site. We have Lincoln here on our left. The area on the map on the right shows the Newport Arch and the upper city enclosure. We have the castle here, cathedral here. Our site lies in the northern suburb, which is situated to the north of the defended area of the Roman Colonia and adjacent to the course of the Ermine Street. So this road here, Newport, which is what's given the name to the suburb, so to speak, runs through here. The main areas of interest for today's presentation, we've got the area excavated by Allen Archaeology, which is number one, which provides the main area of excavation. This was excavated in 2013 with subsequent work in 2015. We've got a group of local archaeologists who've done a series of excavations in the area as part of a scheme, perhaps inspired by this, to investigate some of the area around here. So test pits were dug at point 2 here, which is closer to the course of Ermine Street, along the lines where there probably were some Roman roadside buildings stretching out from the Newport Arch North Gate. We have site number 3, which is over here, which was the former drill hall or TA centre, and with significant quantities of whiteware and evidence from burials here. Also off the main course of the street there, what would have been backyard or cemetery areas around there. Again, similar things over at the Broadway service station site here at 4. At 5, the BG University site, which was the former training college. This site here was investigated in the 90s as part of the work done by City of Lincoln Archaeological Unit. Initially, when it was written up for a lot of the City by the Pool material, this site was considered to be a sort of extramural farmstead a bit further away from the main focus of settlement activity. But what we can see now, with joining the dots, so to speak, further down the course of Ermine Street here, we can see that there's probably quite a considerable amount of settlement that runs all the way along there, all the way out to this site, in a similar way that's been recognised in the Wigford settlement, basically to the south of the Witham through that area there. So it's probably perhaps on the outskirts in an area of roadside settlement out from the main gate, with backyards including industrial activity, where we've had some brewing and some metalworking evidence, but also areas of cemetery as well that have been recorded. Again, we also see area 6. Further work was undertaken more recently again in the BG University lawned area there, and similar material was found suggesting further roadside settlement there. Okie dokie. One of the things is that the excavation area 1, there was a householder who also brought into the local group after the excavations a large quantity of material that was from one of the house plots, probably situated somewhere near to number 2 there. He had brought us in probably double the amount we had from the excavation, and that also augmented the number of finds that were available, including the number of stamps that we could have that we discuss as part of this. Okay, so we can move on to slide 3 there. Right. The site is of interest particularly because they're making light-fired mortaria and light-cored colour-coated wares, which are similar to the products of South Carlton. So South Carlton is situated just outside the main area of Roman occupation. It would have been an out-of-town area over towards where point number 1 is over there. And this is located along the Lincoln Cliff, which is, we believe, is generally the source of the light firing clays in the area. So this is one that we will talk about a fair bit in the discussion too. So there we have point 1. Our site is point 2, which is the Newport kiln, just sort of outside of that inner ring road sort of area of Lincoln. And the other site, which is notable, which is also well known in the literature, is site 8, which is the earlier Technical College Mortarium Production Centre, which is just to the east of the lower city. All of these sites are utilising the light firing clays to the north of the Witham. In addition, the site that Rob largely alluded to, we have a site down here, which is site 6, which is Highcombe Road, which is a site where they're making later Nene Valley colour code type wares. And hopefully we can talk about that again next year when that one's ready for talking about. They're also using material that's presumably taken out of this swathe of clay that runs along here to the west of Bracebridge Heath, also out of the Lincoln Cliff, which is there. We also see some wares which are possibly being made at South Carlton, at Swan Pool, which are using this light clay, which has been probably taken out from the cliff here. But the majority of the kilns, so for example, the Racecourse kiln, the new site at Washingborough, for example, the Highcombe kiln, published by Thompson, and the Swan Pool area that was published by Webster and Booth, subsequent excavations have been taking place. They're largely utilising clay resource and gravel, sand, tempering resources from the drift. So they're producing the majority of the wares which are being used in the city, which are grey wares. So our assemblage is quite unusual and is making the more specialist wares. Okay, I won't dwell too much on the actual excavations. The site was largely done as a strip map and record exercise. There were some evaluation trenches which you can see marked in grey here. The methodology was such that I don't think it really allowed the best investigation of the area as a whole, but that was largely what the organisation was faced with as part of the brief that they worked to. But good results came from it. I think what you can see in the early phases is that you can see some road ditches, which, some perhaps boundary ditches that were aligned parallel to Ermine Street, which would have sat further over here. And you see another phase recorded in here. The subsequent sort of phase 2A features, you're getting a lot of pits. And so we've got the pits, but we've also got nothing that was identified as a kiln during the excavation. So one of the things that we do have to support the fact that it was a production site is we've got large quantities of bits from fire bars that were also in the same light fired clay. We've got a number of mortaria and whiteware and colour-coated wasters. So I think we can be fairly happy that there is production going on nearby and that it's not just a chance find, but unfortunately the kilns themselves weren't located. But if you consider the footprint of the building, you can see it's quite likely that that big gap in the middle could have hidden quite a few bits and bobs in there. So I think regrettably we didn't actually get a nice structure. But if we can move on to there. The interesting thing was when I went through it is one can typically say you turn out an urban assemblage from Lincoln that you could see way over 50% of grey wares. When I first looked at it, I thought it was noteworthy that there weren't any, and I had some sort of dismayed phone call saying, have I only received one of 3 boxes? Where's the rest of it? And I think that this is when it was made clear that it wasn't in any way a selected assemblage, that we had an assemblage that was particularly atypical, and that was largely due to the production on the site. Move on to the next slide there. The main products of the kiln are pretty much the same as we've seen from Graham Webster's 1944 publication of South Carlton. So we're seeing these sorts of colour-coated beakers here. They've got light-fired cores. They do have a little bit more mica in perhaps than one might expect from the Nene Valley, but again, that's dependent upon how they've been fired. It would seem that the majority of the more successfully fired examples have a nice sort of orangey colour coat, and this would fit with generally how South Carlton products have been described, and also the material that's extant in the museum collections which we've been through. Some of them are fired to a dark brown. We're not seeing as many of these sort of slightly bluier, greyer hues that you see from some of the Neem Valley ones here, but that's generally what we're seeing. Most common type beakers are ones that are either sort of small inverted or cornice rim types that are usually bag-shaped forms. Rouletted decoration occurs. We didn't have that many examples with rough casting, like 13, but they were present. There was also a few other ones that perhaps had more plain rims, slightly curved over rims, and it's possible that these may reflect the kind of slightly later production phase, perhaps later than some of the mid-2nd century mortaria that we've got from the site itself. Also present were a number of colour-coated dishes with, broadly speaking, kind of grooved rims. Again, maybe a segmental flange bowl, a small fragment from a caster box, and a lipped bowl. It was interesting that there was also a few jars made in there, but very few greyware jars, or very little way of what we would see as a normal domestic assemblage was present. So that's, broadly speaking, colour coats. Some unusual vessels. We see this roundel, which has been expanded, and a quick drawing of it there. And we also see another vessel here, which has got some sort of moulded decoration and had a handle, but this was so badly excoriated that we couldn't say much about this. The Lincoln Archaeological Group's excavations also produced a nearly complete example of another beaker, which was very similar to kiln product material. May have been deposited in the grave, but what we're seeing with this one is a much more decorative roundel on there. But that's a nice vessel that we saw as part of the later project. The oxidised wares, very much like what was published by Webster from the South Carlton site. We can mostly see flagons with these sorts of slightly developed top rims on the top. We can see some other ones with slightly more grooved, slightly sort of grooved split rims there. And then we can see pinch neck flagons as well. The example that you can see illustrated from the photograph, that's the most common type that we saw. Also, if we look up at number 32, you can see that there's a vessel there which is akin to what's actually been produced in some of the fine greyware Parisian ware types. You can see a few jars that have been made in whiteware. Again, some grooved rim dishes, something that in the case of number 37 that perhaps looks a little bit like a copy of a 1831, and a few bowls, again lit bowls with some dotted parchment ware type paint on. Small lid, tazze, and rather unusually a fragment from a costrel, which is not the type of vessel that's regularly recognised in Lincoln. So quite an interesting one to have there. Time. Just to show really the similarity with the material that Webster published. We'll come through to the mortarium more a little bit further on. You can see again in number 7, you have these beakers with the roundels. You have some rough cast beakers. Again, the way those beakers have been recorded, say number 4A or bowls, we didn't have quite so many that replicated that. But again, similar forms on the beakers and very similar forms on the range of flagons that I just illustrated earlier on, particularly for example 2N and 2P down in this bottom corner. And the fabrics, again, were very similar, which led us early on to believe that there's quite a high possibility that the material was brought from the area of South Carlton, where the material can be, the light-fired clays can probably be accessed in the actual cliff edge across to the material, across over onto our site where it lies on limestone brash. So it's less likely that they could have extracted the clay in the immediate area. So they're looking at them moving kind of maybe just under a kilometre's worth of distance to move their clay to the site, and that they're situated, in the case of the Newport site, near Ermine Street, perhaps as a priority to be close to the market rather than further afield like they are near the clay source at South Carlton. The Mortari fabrics were generally doing okay at the time. We had only one vessel that would conform to the type of fabric that's recorded as the Technical College fabric in the National Fabric Reference Collection. This was perhaps an outlier, may have been present as part of some of the earlier material, because excavations on the BG University site opposite showed good evidence of Flavian groups as well. So that perhaps doesn't really represent a product of the kiln. The majority of the material that we saw was really within a range of the South Carlton whitework fabric, as that we can see published up in the National Fabric Reference Collection. Some of the material, like this Molin 3 fabric, was a little coarser. Obviously, there was a range in colours through from white through to some slightly poorly mixed, slightly pinker variants, and through to ones that were reduced where they've been successfully fired. We had one vessel that was perhaps a candidate, really, was tentatively identified. We would need chemical analysis to be sure, but this fabric here that we have as Molin 4/Mansetta Hartsil had much more of a typical Mansetta type fabric. Unfortunately, in the absence of being able to procure someone suitable to do the analysis, we had to leave that one a little bit open. But we did have another slightly more unusual fabric, which was this Molin 5 one, which was again fairly similar to the standard South Carlton type fabric, but again there was some more ferrous rich grains, but also grog within it that looked a lot more like the material, say for example, that we can see in Molin 3, perhaps much more like an attempt to mimic some of those fire clay type grits, and certainly from the samples of the limited number of vessels that we had, the fabrics didn't look like the typical Mansetta Hartsil. Unfortunately, in the absence of some scientific analysis about the chemical composition, I don't think we can move much further than what we've presented here at the moment. The mortaria forms, the majority of them are hooked forms, especially the ones that have been stamped. We just throw these ones up there as a slide. The one that was in the Molin 4/maybe local fabric was number 78, and the more unusual forms 79, 80, and 81 were the ones that we saw in the Molin 5 fabric that we characterised for this one here. And again, they're a little bit more atypical. But if we move on to the comparisons, we can see these are the forms that were illustrated by Webster from South Carlton. And again, I think we can find a fair match for pretty much most of them. Certainly these ones with slightly split rims at the bottom here, and again these forms here, we see a very similar range of products, perhaps not the slightly tapered rim, which I'll show you in a minute. So for example, 66 up here, there weren't quite as many that had that nice neat tapered rim, but broadly speaking, the comparable material can be shown at both sides. If we move on, these are the less typical forms, but again, there are some similarities to some of the ones K, X, and H from the South Carlton publication and from the extant material in the boxes. If we look at the work that's gone on for the stamps, I think the main interest from the site has been that it's allowed K to locate 4 potters that previously considered to be from Lincoln or Lincolnshire to a production site. So the range of dates we have ATO/OTA, and the dating that's been established for this potter or this workshop is AD 140 to 165. We see a stamp of the potter Kriko, who's also known from South Carlton. His dates are AD 140 to 165. We have Cupitus, who perhaps has a broader range of AD 140 to 170, and Seneca, who's AD 140 to 160. And we have a potter called Elias, who we'll show a little bit further, who's, again, the reading of his lettering is perhaps open to question, and he will become INC 87 in the Mortarium reference. And his dating is also placed to AD 140 to 165. And I think that would fit with the majority of the courseware vessels that we can see. So certainly the main focus of production on the site would appear to be in that range. ATO OTA, we're seeing from his dies occurring at Lincoln, York, and further up into Scotland. So he's seeing a similar distribution to Kriko. And here we've got some pictures of some of the dies here. He's also, in this instance here in number 55, has got a split rim, or slightly split rim tip, rim mortarium there. We move on to the next one. We have Kriko. Kriko here is a potter who's well known from South Carlton, and his work is distributed well across East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and up into the north. We can move over to Cupitus. His work is mostly appearing in Lincoln, including this is an example from the Lincoln group's excavations with multi-stamp, a large vessel with multiple stamps all the way along the rim. And there's a similar one of this, similar to this, published from Silver Street in the Maggie and Barbara's corpus. We also had another example with die 3 as well. And again, Seneca, potter that was distributed broadly, he can now be at least, although he has at least 9 dies, we can see that a number of his dies can be recognised on this production site. And then we have Elias, or again, the reading of this one is unclear, as Kay has mentioned, that we're not quite sure of where the edge of the stamp is, so we can't really be sure on the reading of this one. His work's been found on this site and at Dragonby, but also recent find at Saxony as well, which is over to the west of the site. I think we're almost there. To throw out some conclusions, although no kiln structures were recognised, the pottery waste and kiln structure fragments in the light fireplace suggest pottery production perhaps at the rear of properties facing into Early Street. A workshop of 4 potters previously considered to work in Lincolnshire can be confirmed now to a Lincoln source. In both of the clay source, the form repertoire, and in the work of Kriko, it appears there was a link between this site and South Carlton. It was published by Graham Webster. While the distribution of the stamp mortari from this site can be demonstrated due to the work of Kay Hartley, and this is soon to be disseminated through the mortaria project that's underway, the full distribution of the colour-coated wares and white wares on present evidence is less obvious. Consultation with other researchers about the range of colour-coated wares recorded from the north may yet isolate further instances of the other products from this site and South Carlton occurring elsewhere. Given the challenges of working with whiteware fabrics and some of the similarities superficially between the Nene Valley products, these ones, and also, again, perhaps some continental imports too, we can see that unless scientific analysis can be brought to bear on the production sites and also expanded out to some of the sites from the consumer sites, then the distribution of the rest of the products of this kiln site can be considered a known unknown. And thank you to the people who've prepared this with me, Alan Archaeology, Lincoln Archaeological Group, Kay and Ruth for discussing the mortaria as part of the stamps project, and the archives and HER. Thank you.